It's on page. What is this page? Oh, there we go. So it's like page 18. You'll see there's a bunch of random. Gets a bit messy. There's like
Yeah.
black text, blue text. I'll just highlight.
Yep. Content. Okay, activity. There we go.
We're talking about this, the context. You're talking about. You said it's a type of identity, and then the box, or what is it, the square analogy.
Yeah, cube.
And why don't we continue from there? Because I didn't get.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just expanding on that. I was saying context is a type of identity. It's an aspect of reality that you're thinking about, rather than some like something else. I mean, it's part of the identity of something, of some set of things you're thinking about. And it's information about like where in time it is, where in space it is, or at least for concrete things. For other things, it might be, say, in reference to goals or purpose, that sets a purpose or a nature to something you're thinking about. It gives you like, say if you're thinking about, it gives you a way to focus your mind on something. Like rather than just on everything, it's like you're focusing on things for a reason, for a purpose, for some objective.
What else would be a type of identity then?
Could say causality, maybe. Causality is like a corollary of identity, as it is part of the nature of entities. It's how they behave, how they act.
So only causality and the concept context are an instance of identity.
Those are the most basic forms of it I can think of. There might be more, but those are what come to mind that maybe are most important for thinking about how something is and what makes it one thing rather than another. Like what makes an apple rather than an orange. Like what about it? Like you can context just sets the way to think about it.
Not really following
It's
that.
hard to explain it without a basis of more concept formation, because it would be setting the context of which entities you're taking in, which entities you're integrating.
So is knowledge an identity as well?
I would say it more derives from the nature of consciousness. I mean, they're all connected, of course. All the axioms imply each other, but I would think knowledge is more an aspect of consciousness, because knowledge isn't something out there that you find or get. It's something by using your consciousness and your focus you acquire and create in your mind.
Okay. So when I don't even get identity, to be honest. Like identity is just, isn't that was from one of the first chapters where it just says something like it's just pointing out the fact that some things are different from other things and nothing more than that, right? Yes. That was the basic idea of identity.
Essentially.
Yeah, okay. Okay, let's skip that. I don't want to get stuck on that too much because
just identity being like what makes an entity or what an entity does in terms of its actions and what it is, like what it impacts in the world.
Yeah, I mean, but I don't see the connection to context to that either. It's too abstract, and I don't want to get too.
Okay.
We can continue at another time.
Sure.
But I'll get too tangled, and I'll
leave that more for concept development. That will help more.
Cool. Um, there's that idea that we were talking about before that all knowledge is interrelated. Does it apply to perceptual knowledge as well? Is all of that interrelated?
I would think especially that because um, yeah, because that's what grounds your thinking. The knowledge about the perceptual things is really the grounding to a lot of this. That all knowledge relates at some level, if it's valid, to something perceptual. That's reduction. Can it be reduced to something more perceptual?
Okay. All right. Cool. What do you think of what's your definition of intelligence? Obviously there's a lot of this. I'm not looking for like some very specific objective answer. I'm just curious what your own personal thought is on
Um,
what intelligence is, because there's no, you know, I don't think there's a set.
like one's ability to focus their mind and um, think efficiently.
But efficiency is measured by intelligence, isn't it?
Um, well, I would say that efficiency is how you measure intelligence. Yes, I mean that's
No, I
just
mean like you're more efficient the more intelligent you are. So it's right. Wouldn't that be like a
yeah. I mean, I would say if you're, but it implies the techniques you learn for thinking techniques. As in, it's not something inborn. It's a matter of
mm,
the techniques you use to think efficiently. And the more
okay?
efficient you are, then the better you're thinking. Some of that would be inborn, perhaps, like the speed in which you can process information coming into your eyes could be
Okay.
inborn,
So
but it
so
consists of some skills that you would have naturally that might be influenced by genetics, but then also the consciously focused skills like choice to focus and all these things we're talking about objectivity.
okay. So then in your mind it would be so one element was speed, another one was focus. Although in the previous chapters we did discuss the focus thing being free but volitional. So
Yes.
how do you think about that? Like if it's I always thought of so I mean maybe you're saying in your mind intelligence has a volitional and a non-volitional component, right? So the speed
Yes.
might be the non-volitional one. Is that what you were?
Yes. Yes,
Yeah,
it
and then
is.
the focus is the volitional one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So the
okay.
volitional one is probably, I mean, it works really well anyway. It's not like if you're not the fastest, you're not that smart, but it overcome a lot in terms of how efficient your thinking is, say, effectively using concepts, reducing things easily, or knowing if you need to reduce something or not, or those sort of questions.
Yeah. Um,
Or even ability
if
to adapt to your situation, like creative thinking, like how can you adapt to your, say, like how do you adapt on the fly to say whether you're a hunter or you're an artist or a chef. Like you need to be able to
maybe
adapt to your situation.
maybe that's ability to generalize or speed. I don't really know, but
Yeah, I mean, there's many ways to think of intelligence, but really what I get at is that the efficiency of thinking and that there's a lot of volitional aspects, but there are also some non-volitional. They're just by
yeah,
the nature of how fast your neurons function or something.
the non-volitional is mainly speed, right? And maybe memory as well.
Some
Um,
aspects of memory, yes.
yeah, cool. And then what do you think is the um, like what dominates, as in the volitional or the non-volitional aspect? Like how much, like if someone say has very high memory, high processing speed, but low level of focus. What like yeah, so I'm reading. I told you I'm reading Crime and Punishment at the moment, and there are scenes where he's like delirious and wandering around, and he's like going from one emotion to another, pushing away thoughts. But then when he does choose to focus, he's incredibly intelligent. Like, you just get that, um, he's coming up with rationalizations on the spot to explain all these little missing details. He's like picking up on tiny little traps that a detective is setting him, but that's only when he chooses to focus. So if you read that, you might say, well, the thing that matters the most is the genetic component or the
Yeah,
non-volitional component.
I mean, that's very hard to actually quantify. I mean, I would say that the volitional has a lot of power to it because concepts themselves are shape so much of what you think that the concepts you
Okay.
form, which is volitional, would have a huge impact. So it's hard to say how much of an impact it is. I would say a large impact based on what I do know about cognitive science, that
Mm.
having this material is cognitive, like developing your concepts appropriately is probably one of the most important things to thinking, which you aren't born with anyway. And nobody really talks about like happening automatically. They always talk about like the developmental things, like resources that children have to develop their thinking with like books, access to books, and like environmental stimulus out there to interact with. So there's a lot of talk about how children interact themselves with their environment, how they interact with things and explore their environment. And that seems to be a larger impact on your ability to be like intelligent than say if you've just been born with good genes.
Oh, I know what you're saying. So the environment during childhood and maybe teen years is that they've done research on that and found that to be significant in terms of like having an impact on a person's later thinking abilities.
Yes, and that's where a lot of
Oh, that's cool. Could you?
developmental psychologists think about.
I'll try to look it up, but if there are any studies that you can think of, maybe just send me links later. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I can send you some really simple studies
Yeah,
that
yeah,
are
yeah.
really give the idea of that.
That'd be really cool.
Hmm.
Oh, that's, what also I'm thinking about then is that would maybe point to if you begin the process of correctly integrating concepts early on and you start well, then it's like the tree, right? You've got solid roots, and then whatever you build on top of that is. So the only way to really know
Yes.
for sure is do a complete what is it, remedial like disintegration, reintegration of all essential
Yeah.
concepts, and then go, okay, well, let's actually see if it makes a difference or not, which I want to do. So that's
Yeah. I
cool.
mean, I don't even know if that's possible to do. So that's the difficulty of developmental psychology.
Yeah,
Like you're not going to just test a kid that, or you're just going to throw them into like a, an abusive situation just to see, oh, is this these genetics, is that
yeah,
overcome this abusive situation? Like you don't even test that. It's just
yeah. I
really
mean,
complicated.
are there even genetic markers right now for things like there's no, I don't even know is there a formal definition of intelligence right now, or are they still?
There's different ways to think of it depending on your psychology theory that you operate under.
Yeah, okay.
I'm going to look it up, at least one definition.
I definitely think memory has a big part to play,
Yeah.
but other than that, I
Yeah.
don't really
I mean,
know.
it depends. Like IQ, well, human intelligence is a very large field in itself.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
including all of the aspects of it that might affect, which then goes from genes and education, they really do consider all of it. They try to measure all aspects of it. And there's many aspects of it, like spatial reasoning, like speed of processing, memory span, logical reasoning. I mean, there's so many aspects of it that they try to piece it together. Just there's so many variables that we can barely even say it's genetic. It's something you would say is polygenetic that is also determined by so many genes that you can't say, oh, there's this one gene that affects it. Like so many aspects of genetics and thinking that you can't really reduce it to a single thing. It's really
Yeah.
always a broad sort of definition.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Um, let's see what else. Let's go to the context again.
Yeah,
Maybe we can get at it by just asking simpler questions rather than what is it
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Um, okay, so in this passage, it said something like the epistemological responsibility imposed by man by the fact that knowledge is contextual is the need of integration. So I'm still a bit lost on the whole the what he calls the metaphysical basis for interrelated knowledge, but I'm just accepting that for now and going with what he's saying. So we must integrate our knowledge. The responsibility imposed by the fact that knowledge is hierarchical is the need of reduction. But in that chapter, he said so hierarchy is a type of context. So wouldn't if both of these things are contextual, um, doesn't that mean that reduction is a form of integration as well, or am I just getting lost here?
I mean, I would
I
say just hierarchy has context, like where you are in the hierarchy, you could say is the context. I mean, there is a hierarchy to all of it, but then what you're considering, it depends where in the hierarchy you're trying to think. Like, are you trying to be like perceptual or are you trying to be abstract? That's the sort of thing I would say that can determine the context of your thinking, like what you're trying to consider. Um,
mm,
I would not say reduction is a type of integration because I think it presumes you've already integrated something. You put some ideas together, you've generalized. A reduction would just be to ungeneralize, like take the pieces apart and unglue them and see what they were before. Like if you integrate into like a concept justice, well, you got to take it apart again. Like what was the material you used to say justice is a concept? What were the observations in reality or prior concepts of that?
oh, okay, okay.
So you just keep taking it
Uh,
apart until you get to where you began, the perceptual level.
hmm,
And the fact
okay,
that your thinking is on a hierarchy suggests that you do need to, at some level, reduce it to the lower levels of the hierarchy to more perceptual things. Because by saying there's a hierarchy, you can say you can be more abstract or less abstract. And that would mean that if you want to validate the perceptual level, you've got to go back down the hierarchy after you went up.
yeah, okay. All right. So I sort of see why it wouldn't be reduction is separate. Um,
I mean, they're important to each other, of course, because there's nothing to reduce if you didn't integrate anything. And if you don't integrate, then how do you know your concepts are actually even connected to the perceptual level?
yeah, yeah. The thing I was caught on was that he's saying it was like I imagine when he says hierarchy as a type of context, it's like a specific instance of context, just like
Yeah,
dog is an instance of animal, or human is an
yeah,
instance of animal, and so I was like, well, what is this? Yeah, that's what I was getting caught up on. So it's a kind of context, and
yeah. I think
then
that's fair to say.
I was like, what are other instances then? Is what I was thinking about. I was just trying to get my head around that. Uh, I guess it's still stuck on this context thing.
Well, hierarchy, space, time.
Oh, okay, okay. I see. Yeah, time, place, all that. What you said might be a context. It may or may not
Yeah,
be. But
like those are always
okay.
questions of context. Like you're asking, who is it that we're thinking about? Well, that's the context too. Like, what are we
Hmm.
thinking about? I don't know. Thinking about bicycles. I mean, that's like studying the context. That you're saying I'm not talking about these other things.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to the next thing. We can skip that. Um, I'm pretty sure I've discussed some of this stuff with you as well, because he's talking about his reduced friend in this example
Yeah,
and friendship. Let me see what I wanted to get at. So it's more like, okay, all right, this is how the hell do you do this? And then do you just get to it looks like he's saying you just look at the essential. Um, So you have to identify what is the, like, if you're looking at the definition, you would be reducing um, the species, right?
Reducing would be, well, think of something less abstract. That's how I usually think of reduction, not necessarily um, saying what are the more narrow, going down from genus to species, but more going from abstract to concrete. And what would be more concrete than friend? It's you would think, well, what kind of observation does it rely on, or what does the concept friend presuppose that you've conceptualized or observed? Which it's not like there's a good formula to do this, and I think a lot of that has to do with, well, there's many ways to accomplish this. I think that's a lot of the job of philosophy anyway. How do you know what is important to your thoughts, or how do you figure out what is important? That's in large part the whole project of philosophy, like trying to find what's true. And how would you reduce it? That's probably the most challenging thing. But I think the general idea is here is that he's taking um, what's essential about the concept friend and then going from there to say um, what makes possible that kind of, what observation makes that abstraction possible, or what something more perceptual makes that possible.
Yeah, okay. So it is just identifying the, like I said, I do think it would be species then. That would be seem to be like the best way to do it. Wouldn't a species be the essence of something? Like, you say man is a rational animal, genus is animal, species is rational, or whatever. And then you're like, okay, now I have to, oh, I don't even know if that works actually.
Not even necessarily a essential, it's just something more narrow of the wider category. In the same way that um, dogs are canines, like dog is a species of canine just because it's a more narrow definition of a certain type of canine.
Mm.
And it's not necessarily the essential of canines or anything, it's just the more narrow aspect of it. Then you kind of need both to understand what's general and what's specific about the thing you're talking about.
Need both of what?
Like the more general aspect being the genus like general,
Yeah.
like man, like an animal you could say, or whatever you might use for the genus, and species being what distinguishes it from other men or other animals, which is rational thinking. That's more like what it is.
So isn't that the essential then? Because rational, that's why I was thinking, because I know the definition was like man is rational animal and rational is supposed to be the distinguishing or essential. So I just kind of, I thought maybe
Um,
everything else follows the same pattern.
I guess it would be similar to an essential. I mean, I can't think of an example where it isn't, other
Yeah.
than like, yeah, I can't really think of an example where it isn't,
Okay. I'm
but I don't
asking
want to
because I
say
was
there
going to set
aren't
up
any.
like, I was going to set up little Anki flashcards to like start going through creating like my own little definitions of things. But
I mean, if you want to talk
um,
about essential, just say essential. And species is more of not necessarily implying essential. That's the only reason I'm
okay.
wary of the word.
But you can't think of anything at the moment. Let me just write it
No.
down. Genus species.
I mean, genus and species is more like categorization. If we're talking about essential, that's more like more than just categorization. We're talking about the epistemological nature of things, or the nature of things, not just how we categorize.
Okay, I always thought those rules. I'll have to. I haven't gone on to the concept stuff, but I thought that was the point of like the definition to give you the essential and then the wider category. Like, let's apply it
I
even to
would say
friend, right?
yes, that's true. The way you
Let's
phrase that sounds correct.
let's apply it even to friend, right?
Yeah.
So he reduced friend, and he says here, I assume this is the genus, the relationship, and then the essence is, I don't know which one of those is. Oh, he's saying it's this. I'll go with that because I have no clue. Well, he says a few things here actually. Oh no, so I copy pasted this. So yeah, he said it was esteem, and then he went from esteem to moral value to purpose to choice. That was his way of doing it. So anyway, I can start following this pattern, like you pointed out. Maybe that's not correct, but I could start following that pattern and see. The only issue is you don't know, like, the dictionary doesn't give you these essences, right? Like a dictionary isn't gonna give you this stuff.
No.
So it's pretty hard. Like I wouldn't be able to tell that this was the essence and this was the next thing, or that was the essence of this of esteem. So I wouldn't be able to tell, okay, esteem is the essence of esteem is moral value, the essence of moral value is purpose, the essence of purpose is choice. I wouldn't be able to I wouldn't be able to tell you that.
Um, do you know what page that was in?
I can find it for you. I just search. Yeah. It's in the chapter 5 objectivity, the context section. I think, the reduction section, but I'll get you the specific location number in Kindle now. I'll search for it. There's a whole section he does on the reduction, which I was trying to create a template out of that. No, let me just. Men to choose among purposes. All right, so it's location 2492. My Kindle is page 135, but it'll probably vary.
Yeah,
Um,
just scanning through the chapter 2 until I get there. What's that?
yeah, you can go to location 2492. Look at the bottom.
Yeah, almost there. Um, I mean, you saw the definition of hierarchy that Peacock used, right? Um, it was saying a hierarchy of knowledge means a body of concepts and conclusions ranked in order of logical dependence, one upon another, according to each item's distance from the base of the structure. The base is the perceptual data with which cognition begins.
Yep, I got that part.
Okay.
Yeah.
2492. Reduction. Yeah, here we go.
I mean, it's quite a bit that he writes about just reducing friend, but he
Yeah,
goes on to, like, a certain person and a certain kind of human relationship. Human relationship obviously is a genus, as against an acquaintance, a stranger, an enemy. In essence, the relationship involves mutual knowledge, esteem, affection. As a result, the individual take pleasure in each other's company, communicate, blah, blah, blah. To identify so complex a relationship, one must have formed earlier concepts, including man, knowledge, pleasure. Let us focus here on the central element, esteem, and then he goes on to reduce it.
esteem, yeah.
But it's pretty interesting because I don't know if I'd been able to identify the essence of that myself. So, but you got to do that for every single common concept.
Yeah, I think I would reduce it differently than Peacock did. I mean, I
Yeah.
agree with the method. I don't know if I would go the same direction he did. But I don't think there is an absolute correct way to do it, because it could also partly depend on, well, what knowledge have you come across and what way
Right.
is your hierarchy organized? Which
Right.
there's the hierarchy is not automatically determined in every level by reality. To some extent, it has to do with what way you've ranked some things, say. Something you're more familiar with might be less abstract to you compared to someone else. So maybe that would just reflect
Can you give me
I've
an example of
organized.
what you
Well,
mean?
I think a concept like friendship is more concrete than Peacock does, it seems. Like I think of it more as he thinks it more abstract to like the feeling. Like I think of it more as like the concrete, like the person I'm with. Like, I think that's a bit different. So I don't, I'm not as abstract as his thinking it seems to be on it.
Okay. The person you're with. Oh, I see what you're saying. But yeah, I guess he's making that distinction between, um, so there's human relationships, which includes acquaintance, stranger, enemy. There's
Yeah,
probably a spectrum, and then friend is like a specific
yes.
one in there. So, but what
Species, yeah,
about yeah? What about he's saying because there's too much. Like obviously everything has its own characteristics.
right.
Um, and some of those characteristics will be abstract, as in like I can't point to them. But he's saying because it's too much to reduce, you only focus on the essence. What do you think of that?
I think that makes sense because you probably would not get anywhere if you try to consider everything, every single thing. You got to focus on the distinguishing thing because you're focusing on the distinguishing thing that should be able to tell you what's, you probably won't be missing anything important. Like anything you're missing wasn't important anyway. But as you're focusing on the essence, you're keeping your mind focused on the qualities that matter, the way you've thought about your concept anyway, all along.
Yeah, yeah. What do you what like if you're not if so okay, I understand that this is the process. He's talking this whole context here of this conversation or this section is about validating knowledge and the two actions or whatever we methods maybe or it's one
Yeah.
method look I don't know but the two methods to make sure the knowledge is valid, so one is contextual integration and reduction, but if you're not actually reducing everything, would it be fair to say it's possible that part of your knowledge, like you can never validate part of your knowledge because you're not, it's too much to actually do a proper reduction of all knowledge?
I mean, on practical levels, there's some things that you haven't reduced. I mean, you're right. There's so much that there's some things you probably would not have reduced, but reduction just remember it's just a check on your concepts. It's not. It doesn't mean only then will you know. Only then is it knowledge, or only then is it valid. It's just a thing to support it, but it doesn't. It's not a requirement to have knowledge.
But it's a require. Yeah, I agree. But I think we touched on this also with when we were discussing that thread about the like you have to grasp something first before you can reduce it and all that. But then like it's not a requirement for knowledge, but from what I got in this section, it would be a requirement to validate knowledge. I don't know.
Yes.
That's an interesting. Uh,
Yeah, like to double check it, you would need it. It's, I mean, you can be right without checking, but it's like when you do the double check, then you'll be sure. You could just be extra sure. That's more what I mean. Like if you're having trouble thinking about something or you've reached a problem with something, that might indicate, oh, now's a good time to double check my concepts because I think something might be wrong here.
yeah,
That's usually when you would do it when I would say when you suspect something's wrong, when something's not working, when you're
yeah,
stuck on a problem,
yeah.
that's when you might want to do it.
Right. When you're experiencing a conflict of some kind.
Yes, or obviously like you're maybe noticing a contradiction, but you've not yet found it. So that's a time where it's like, yeah, maybe I should double check where something's gone wrong. Like
Could you
going over, like you did a math problem and you thought you did it right all along, but then your answers, wait, this makes no sense. You just got to retrace your steps sometimes.
Yeah, and how would that apply? Could you think of an example in the case of reduction? Have you ever done that where you're like, there's a conflict you're experiencing and you've then reduced a concept?
Maybe relationships sometimes. Um, that's the only one I could think of more explicit. I've done some degree of reduction for like behaviorism when I'm thinking about it in psychology. Sometimes about like um, memory too. I really I've changed my thinking on what memory is in the past 3 years, especially because I've studied it narrowly. It changed my thinking on it a bit. I've had to reconsider ways I've thought about memory, reconsider the way I've organized in my head, things like that.
Got it. And then you've done that because initially there was like a conflict or confusion, but then once
Yeah,
you,
more like confusion, like
yeah,
or not understanding, like or realizing that there's more to it than I thought.
yeah,
So then I needed to like reorganize some of it.
yeah. Do you say you've heard that quote? There's something about uh, a mark of a great mind is to be able to hold two contradictory ideas at the same time. What do you think of that? Because to me, that would mean confusion.
I
So,
believe Aristotle said that.
sorry?
I think Aristotle said that. Was
No,
my
no, it wasn't. A great mind holds two. I'll tell you who it was.
like
Let's see.
entertain contradictory
Scott
ideas.
Scott Fitzgerald, the author. The test
Oh,
of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold
oh,
two opposing ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. To me, that's the definition of confusion. Hold two opposing ideas in mind. What do you think of that?
I think it would be confusion. It's maybe more a matter, can you consider these weird ideas and still know what's true? To think like
Right,
somebody else, but still maintain your rationality. And it would be confusing, yes, very difficult.
right.
But I would say that.
I just found cognitive dissonance is the mental stress or discomfort experienced by an individual who both holds two or more contradictory beliefs,
Mhm.
ideas, or values. So one guy's saying it's a mark of being a genius, someone else is saying you can experience cognitive dissonance and mental stress. Okay, cool. So I guess that's what confusion is then.
In a way,
They're holding.
experiencing cognitive dissonance is a time when you want to reduce, probably.
I
Because
don't
just
even know
that,
if I've experienced cognitive dis. I don't even know what that is,
just
to be honest, but
the
it
feeling
sounds.
of um, like just the feeling of confusion, really.
Oh, okay.
Like you
So
think
it's
one
all.
thing, but then it's like it conflicts with your thinking and like a clash of ideas.
Yeah. 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 Okay. That's
And then you resolve it eventually.
we're talking about, you only need to do reduction when you're confused about something. But what about like the process of integrating? Like, if I think of certain words, like let's say, what might be something like friend. I don't know if I've got, it's weird to think I have the concept, but then the way I describe it is just descriptive sentences and sort of associational type images. That wouldn't, to me, would that mean I have the concept or that means I have the material for the concept? Because to me, from what I got reading this book anyway, to have the concept would mean I have it like neatly organized in terms of like, this is the genus, this is the species, this is how it relates to this is how it relates to that. But so is that, yeah, what would that mean if I have words and I have associations for them and I have, you know, I can say descriptive phrases. Does that mean I have the material for the concept, or does that mean I have the concept?
Mm,
You know what I mean? This is getting it back at what David was saying was like you first have to grasp or acquire before you can form or something like that. I can't remember.
um, usually, if you can describe something well, you could say you have the concept, that you form the concept. You could say that there's more information you need about it, but you have the idea of it, you have the gist of it, or more than just the gist of it, like you're understanding what it distinguishes, what's distinguished from what. And when you can do that, you form the concept, I'd say.
Um,
If you can make
yeah,
distinctions and
but like it's interesting. He said he identified esteem as the essence of friend, but I think about it, when I thought about it, it was like, oh well, it's someone you spend more time with than other people. It's someone that you have spending time with, you like share more intimate, knowledge. But it's not like I got down to like one thing. And so I'm wondering, does that mean, I don't know, it doesn't feel like feels like I've, got the material for the concept, but I don't know if maybe that is the concept. I don't know. I've just got all these random, yeah.
You could simplify the definition. I mean, eventually, I think that's maybe more the way to go. Not so many words, because then it seems like there's a lot of information there. It'd be hard to reduce
Yeah,
that.
I
That's a
guess.
lot of things to reduce there.
Of course.
And I would just say reduce as much as you can, or simplify as much as you can first before you start reducing, or maybe not even
Well,
simplify, but narrow your definition.
okay, well let me put it this way then. Like if I list all these different characteristics, um, but I can't immediately go to the essence, would you say I have the concept? Because that's in this specific instance, let's say that's what I was doing, which I think is pretty close. Would that be a case of I've got the concept, or no? If I don't have, if I can't, I have probably still have to think about what the essence is. What separates this from other experiences where I spend a lot of time with someone or whatever.
Um, I think you have enough of an essential the way you described it, right, to have the concept. You could say you could word it better and whatnot, but I would say most likely you have the concept. It's not like you're just regurgitating something. You actually consider it and say these are the things that are distinguishing features of a friend. And if you can distinguish it from non-friends, you could say with that person's friend, that person's a friend, and that person over there is an enemy. Like if you can make those distinctions successfully, I think you have the concept. Which even if you can't really state the essential cleanly, I think you still can say it in a concise way that indicates you understand it, and also that you have the concept that you know what you're referring to.
How would you make sure that your concept of friend is integrated? Like, what kind of questions would you ask to do a contextual integration? Like, I don't, this goes back to our previous conversation of knowledge is interrelated. Like, how would you go, okay, what is friends? How would you even know what you need to relate it to? Like, friend, I should relate friend to this and to that or to this, like, piece of knowledge. How would you traverse your contextual knowledge and make sure friend is integrated with no contradictions to everything else?
As a validation, I would, well, first I would take examples of people I call friends and try to think about what is similar among all of them, whether like
Yep.
activities I do, whether it's things I talk about, or whatever it might be. I just consider the things that come to mind when I talk about friend. When I say friend, what am I talking about? So I think
Yep.
about the people like, oh, maybe I play video games with all of them, or just to take a random example, or maybe I could
Yep.
say that's actually not very important because this other person I call a friend, I don't do that with. So you say,
Yep.
well, that's not it. But then you can compare it to, to think about, oh, who's an enemy of mine, or who, or what I call a person I don't care about. Like, how is that like not like a friend? What does a friend have that they don't? That's another way you can go about it. The things that you already label that way, you have to consider, like, or things you don't consider that, because that would help you distinguish as well. And then you could, by doing that, you can see what is, or what you suspect is the most important essential aspect. And then you can go down a level in the hierarchy to reduce that, and then talk about that simpler thing, or the more lower on the hierarchy thing.
I suppose the whole chapter on the concepts would help with these kind of questions, right? Because you're like,
Yes,
it sounds like you're almost traversing that you go backwards from genus and what genus relates to, and then you go down through the species, and that's how you check if it's contextually integrated. But
that's what I would
um,
say. But yeah, I don't think I can explain it more than that without more info for you. So
yeah, okay, cool. So I'll leave some of these as questions, and then wait till we get to the concept stuff.
yeah.
Um, Cool. Let's see what else is here. Okay, can you see I've just actually copy pasted a whole section from an image from the book, which I've
Yeah.
it's on. Yeah, let me see.
Invalid concepts.
Would you first try reduce a concept or integrate it? What would you first do and why?
Well, I mean, the integration is just putting things together into the concept in the first place. So I don't think you can reduce until you've done that at least. Like integration is something you do when you form the concept, not really what you do after you formed it.
Okay, because you're relating it to other images that you've retained as memory or something like that. Is that what?
Yes, or other observations you're making at this
Okay.
moment, things like that.
Okay, so you have to try and integrate it first, and then you reduce it.
You integrate the information. You piece together what you learned and what you're trying to generalize.
Can you get a anti-con? I think I've read anti-concepts she writes about, such as
Yeah.
anti-concepts like isolationism. Does it still have an essence or characteristics? Like, can you have an anti-concept that is like, like if you say extremism or McCarthyism or isolationism, like, does it still has characteristics of some kind, right? It's just a random, it's just a whole bunch of random things put together.
It comes down to the two definitions principle, which maybe we can get to another time.
Yeah, okay.
But I mean, in a normative sense, no, they're not concepts. In a descriptive sense, they are.
A normative sense that I don't know what that means, but
Normative
so
as
what were the
if
two
they're not valid.
definitions?
They're invalid. They're not real. They're broken. They're no good.
Okay. If you're evaluating them by the standard of objective concepts, they're not valid. But then what was the other sense that they're concepts?
Descriptive.
Oh, descriptive. Okay, cool. All right. And do you reckon it makes sense to revisit this when I've gone through all the what was it called? The concept formation stuff?
Yeah, I think that would be a good time then to do the two definitions thing, because that's
Yeah,
the more
cool. I
complex principle.
mean,
And I, I,
yes, sorry.
I didn't even learn about that one for a long time anyway. So it's like more a later thing, for sure.
Okay. Um, okay, this is a pretty simple question, but so he talks about reduction is necessary in regard to all the higher level content, also to propositions. Propositions must be brought back step by step to the perceptual level. So I was just wondering, when you do that, does that mean you're literally looking at every word in the proposition and reducing it, or every concept, and each separately? Like, because that's confusing, because they all fit together, right? They all have some relationship. But then how would you reduce a proposition?
Um, it would be similar, I think. You would take the components. Um, yeah, that's just a really tricky one. I can't even think of good examples of it. Then, um,
Well, at least Peikoff must have this knowledge if he's making that claim. So we can skip it. It's fine.
yeah, I've never heard him talk much about, say, philosophy of propositions or just say using propositions in philosophy. He's never really gone in depth on that in anything I've read or listened to. I would say it has to do with, say, about claims more so than it is about concepts per se. Like you could say you've reduced the concepts even already of the proposition. Then you would like the combination of the concepts is something else. They're not necessarily is not necessarily just an addition of concepts. They're referring to something about reality in particular.
Yeah.
So maybe it would be about reducing it to other facts, like to less concrete facts, um, like quantum physics. You can go talk about like claims in quantum physics and reduce that to maybe Newtonian physics. You could always break apart any quantum physics equation into something Newtonian.
I don't know. I don't know physics
Um,
enough to. Is
I'll
there
I'll put
like
it this
some?
way. Quantum physics is really, really abstract, even beyond the principles Newton came up with. They applied at
Yeah.
little things and big things. Newton is more perceptual because when he came up with his stuff, is more things on Earth, things we can see, not microscopic, not as big as the
Yeah.
sun. Those
Yeah.
go are more narrow applications of quantum physics. So you could say that if you're trying to understand quantum physics, you need to reduce it to Newtonian physics, that basic
Mm.
level of, then you can reduce that even to more simpler claims like from Galileo, who was even earlier than Newton, but had important things and maybe even something more basic than that, like Ball's role or something.
Yeah.
Some process like that. But it couldn't be
Yeah.
just
Okay.
simply reducing each component because putting the components together is what makes a proposition. And they
Exactly.
don't mean the same thing as they do separately.
Yes. Yeah, that's the thing that confused me. Like even okay, that was a physics example, but even looking at this, like if we want to reduce, uh, what is it? We could reduce this. Reduction is necessary. And wait, where is the? I don't know. You could reduce this whole passage, right? But what would that mean if you're, if the whole thing to get what is it? The parts can be greater than the whole can be greater than the parts. So I don't know how that
Yeah.
works with the reduction of propositions, but maybe I'm gonna put that down for later on when
Yeah,
I
that's a
feel
hard
like.
one. That's like reducing a theory in science to perceptual level. It's just a massive sum of information that
Well,
I guess you would need a whole book to even do that.
well, you don't even need to like that's a way more abstract example. It could be something as simple as like you just say something about yourself. I am this or I am that. And
Yeah.
like you make some abstract claim about like I don't know, I'm a very smart person or whatever, and you want to like validate that. That you could apply it to that too. So that's more interesting to
Yes.
me just because those are more day-to-day things. But like there's that issue of anyway, I write it down. The whole is can be greater than the parts. So then how do you reduce a proposition? Maybe that, and then when I go through I can even post about it later. I just